So I'm back from Vipassana, a 10-day meditation course. And if there's one thing I wish people had told me before I walked in there, was that it would break you physically, mentally, and spiritually. It reminded me of a kata we learned at the new Toronto Academy of Martial Arts called Sanchin, the battle of mind, body, and spirit. I went in there with a pretty selfish intent, which was to find out what would make me most happy, thinking that it would be choosing a career path, as I've got more than one on the go. But to my surprise, I discovered that what I truly longed for was a friendship with my father. It was truly humbling, because at the end of the day, whatever career path I take, if it doesn't make other people happy, especially if it doesn't make him happy, I can't be happy. And during the meditation practice, I elected to sit in seiza, which is a common position that we use at the dojo when we meditate. I was using a seiza bench, also known as Buddha's chair. It's just a plank with two legs. It's about 6 inches off the ground. Your feet tucked in underneath it, and you sit on top. And you hold that for hours. And on your first day, you're in pain within 20 minutes. But by the end of the course, I found myself being able to hold 90 minutes without fidgeting once and no physical pain. I found that a lot of what I'd learned in the martial arts was coming into play, as well as some of the other things I'd studied, such as Plato's forms, or 6 types of love. There was some Nietzsche that came up, Hermetic principles, quotes from the Bible, things that you've heard over and over but never really apply until you have this kind of experience. And then all those things that you've learned that you think you know so well, they teach you on a whole other level. You see, I had this tendency to use quotes to my advantage at winning arguments with other people, but never to judge myself. Things like, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." When people react, they're being impulsive. They don't know what they're doing. They're just not conscious. It's a subconscious reaction. Before you comment on the speck in your brother's eye, remove the log from your own. It's just another way of saying, let he who hasn't sinned cast the first stone. It's one thing to read it. It's another one to experience it, to live it. And that's when things started to become a heartbreaker. That's when I really started to get to know myself on a deeper level. So, despite the fact that it was the most painful experience of my life, the most soul-crushing, I wouldn't change a thing, and I would do it again. I put in more than 100 hours of meditation, more than 25 of which were locked up in a meditation cell, which is a 2x3 closet that's pitch black. The weather went from spring with birds chirping to everything freezing over with the utmost silence. And then as the snow seemed to melt, I seemed to be coming out of my nightmare. It felt like it was mirroring my transformation, and it was very poetic. For the first 3 days, I was just reliving all the painful memories of my past until about the age of 5. And it was worse than anything I'd ever felt before. Think of living your entire life's misery in the span of 3 days. I was seriously thinking of leaving, and so I spoke to the teacher about it, and he said this: think of your emotions as your opponent. Don't let them break your balance. Defend yourself with hard breathing. So I immediately think of kazushi, which is to break your opponent's balance, a very common term at the New Toronto Academy of Martial Arts. In fact, I'd say that was probably my specialty, is breaking my opponent's balance, tripping them up, foot sweeps and whatnot. So the moment I heard that, it was on. With Ibuki breathing as my weapon, I made sure not to let the emotions break me, but to break them. So on the morning of the fourth day, I woke up feeling rather scared of what was to come, but I knew that I had to push through and stop running. Had I left, I probably would have come back in a much worse state than when I had left. In fact, had anybody crossed my path in that mindset, I probably would have hurt them. It would have been like walking out of brain surgery halfway through. At first it was physical pain, and then as that faded, it became mental pain, concentration, headaches, patience. And once I had passed through that, it was spiritual. It went straight to the heart. And what we were being taught were 3 techniques, the first of which is Anapana, very much focused on breathing. And it's designed to calm the mind. And the second one is Vipassana, which is a means of scanning the body for sensations, and it trains the subconscious to purify itself from its sankharas. And sankharas is an Indian word for seeds that have taken root in your subconscious that are either aversions or cravings. And to put it in context, if you don't crave anything, and if you don't avert anything, it's the end of suffering. Because think about it. When you crave something, you don't get it, you're miserable. And when you avert something and it's in your face, you're miserable. So get rid of your sankharas, get rid of your misery. The last technique was mate, which flood the mind with feelings of love, compassion, gratitude, and patience. Now, so if you can identify your sankharas and train yourself not to react to them, you effectively give yourself impulse control, which in turn is self-control. And that is probably what I needed more than anything. This is when I started to gain wisdom in my practice. On days 5 and 6, I trained myself to resist those sankharas. And days 7, 8, and 9, I was locked in a meditation cell, which is when things really got deep, and I started auditing myself, my friends, and I learned a whole lot about myself. I learned who I am on a much deeper level. Now, the technique known as Vipassana, which involves scanning your body for sensations, sometimes you get a pleasant sensation, sometimes you get an unpleasant sensation, and you have to resist the urge to react to it. That is the purification process. Now, during this process, I noticed something. I had a blind spot on my right arm, and through every round, it was blind until this one time I started getting a sensation. But just as that sensation was coming up, I got distracted by a new sensation in my temple, something I hadn't felt before. So I deviated from where I was and gone to this temple. And before I knew it, it was a headache coming on, which was rather unpleasant. So I resumed my work and I go back to this blind spot. And sure enough, that sensation that started to build was gone again. And so I thought to myself, wow, I have a history of getting bored with projects, with women, and then I go to this new shiny thing and often look back at what I had with regret because it's gone. Now, resuming the practice, this blind spot developed again, and I started getting goosebumps throughout my entire body, which was a pleasant feeling. And so what I had learned was that if I had just stuck with this and put the time in, put the work in, that boredom would have transformed itself into something far better than anything else in my world. So, Dee, you know what I'm talking about here. Boredom is not necessarily something that you run from, it's something you learn from. It was very profound. It taught me that you get what you put into it, and part-time efforts achieve part-time results. So, word to the wise, know when it's time to quit, and know when it's time to work harder. To be fruitful takes patience and effort. Nothing grows overnight. And that applies to my projects, be it music, my relationships, like the women I've dated, and most importantly, my father. So on the 7th day, I asked the teacher if I could get a meditation cell, which seemed to be reserved for returning students. So he agreed to give me a cell on the condition that I share it with someone else. I'd get the morning, they get the afternoon. And so on that day, feeling like I had been promoted, I figured it would be honorable for me to follow all 8 precepts, not just the first 5. The first 5 are what's expected of you as a new student. The full gamut of all 8 precepts is expected when you return for another course. So the first 5 were no killing, which goes as far as a vegetarian diet, because despite the fact that you haven't killed what's on your plate, you're encouraging it. No lying, no stealing, no drugs of any kind, and no sexual activity of any kind. Not so much as a thought or a fantasy. The last 3 precepts were no luxurious beds, no decorations. So in my case, that would have been a watch. And for the first few days, I had the watch, and I caught myself sneaking a glance during the meditation, just doing a bunch of those, and it really doesn't help. If anything, it holds you back. So, quick tip, don't wear a watch. It will do wonders for your focus. And time will actually go by faster if you're not constantly looking at the clock. And the last precept for returning students was no food after lunch. New students were permitted to have a piece of fruit at about 5 o'clock and a cup of tea. But old students, a cup of tea, lemon water. That's all you got. So that's what I went for. And on that night, I decided to sleep on the floor, using my arm as a pillow. Didn't sleep at all. Come morning, with a 4 a.m. wake-up call, believe it or not, I just jumped out of bed and raced over to that meditation cell. I was very eager to step it up a notch. And after the morning had passed and we had our group meditation in the afternoon, the manager comes over to me and says that the guy who had the cell booked for himself for the afternoon is pulled out. Doesn't want it. In fact, a lot of people found that cell to be too depressing and, gave it a try for 20, 30 minutes and decided it wasn't for them. So, naturally, I took him up on the offer, and I got that cell for the full day for the last 3 days. And, that's when things really, really got intense. Coming out of that cell after a 4-hour sitting felt very surreal. I went for a walk in the woods, and it felt as if I was in myself, like I was looking through a camera. Like the outside world was really outside. And when I had returned to the cell after that walk, I was determined to beat myself. And I got myself saying, "Okay, Sankaras, it's just you and me. Let's dance." After that round, I had realized that my ego was getting into play again. And so I spoke to the teacher for the second time. And he says, "Yeah, you're right. A true master in the martial arts does not promote violence. It's not about winning. It's about witnessing. It's about controlling. And so then I was yet again humbled and went back to the cell and changed my attitude, because when I had first walked in there, I noticed that there was a little crack of light coming from beneath the door. So I took off my shirt, covered that crack so that it was pitch black. And I was getting chills, but I didn't care. This is, tough it out. This is part of your resistance training. But at the end of the day, you're not supposed to torture yourself with these things. You're supposed to just witness each moment as it is. You're not supposed to try and change or control the moments. Just witness them. So rather than take my shirt off when I had gone back to the meditation cell, I brought a blanket and used that to cover the crack, and I made sure that I was reasonably comfortable. And that same night, after tossing and turning on the floor until about 2 a.m, realizing I had to wake up in 2 hours, I gave myself permission to get back into bed. Because if you reread the precept, it says no luxurious beds. Not no bed. When I spoke to the manager about this, I asked him if old students were allowed a pillow, and he just kind of smiled at me and says, of course, why? I was like, well, the precept says no luxurious beds. He's like, listen, Christian, it's about not being pampered and being okay with it. So I realized that, the bed I have at home is queen. It's all mine. I've got 4 plush pillows and a comforter. It's luxurious, but the bed there is maybe 6 inches thick. I can squeeze it flat with one hand. It's single size, pressed up against the wall. I hear my neighbor on the other side of the wall snoring, and I'm knocking my legs on the wall. It's just far from luxurious. So there was no need to torture myself. I had nothing to prove to anybody, including myself. I just needed to get to know myself. So other than that, there are some other things you might want to know about the food. Some people love the food. Some people, like me, not so keen on it. I had porridge for breakfast every day. The options were toast, cereal, or porridge. I have hemochromatosis, which is an iron overload. And so products made with wheat are fortified with iron, so I can't have them. So toast and cereal are out for me. So for the first few days, having porridge every day, which I really loved as a kid, it was tough. But then I got used to it, and I actually enjoyed it. So that's another lesson to be had there is, when you have all of these privileges, you tend to take them for granted and become a snob. And by the time I got back home, I felt super spoiled. Like, it was overkill. I live in a $500,000 condo, 2-bedroom with a rooftop terrace, my own hammock and barbecue, and I don't need all that stuff. I really don't. In fact, I find myself being a snob when friends book a cottage that has a hot tub, and I'm not interested because it's crowded. I have one at home that I can pretty much have to myself if I go at the right time. Now, if I didn't have that, I probably would have been as excited as they were and participated with the group. Last but not least, this whole experience was exhausting. I thought I was going to come back rested, but far from it. It was a lot of work. So don't expect it to be, a means to rejuvenate. In fact, I'm getting a flashback to the 8th day at our final group meditation in the hall. And I felt so drunk. So drunk. Why am I so drunk? I haven't been drinking. All I had was a cup of tea with honey. Okay. Who spiked the honey? This isn't funny. And I realized that I had less than an hour and a half of sleep over the last 48 hours. I wasn't drunk, I was delirious. And here's the proof. as the discourse video started rolling, I looked at that blue screen and I read Day 8, Intercourse. Huh? Oof. Day 8, Discourse. Man, I am ready for bed. No pun intended. On the morning of the 9th day, I was back at it again in the cell. I sat in the cell for the better part of 6 hours, knowing my time was coming to an end, so I wanted to make the most of it. I had passed through my major sankhara, and as the night was coming to an end, I could smell smoke. And again, like, I'm smelling my clothes. I'm like, I have not been smoking. Why do I smell smoke? And realized that that was the next sankhara that I needed to tackle. My mind was playing tricks on me. And by the time I got to my room, the smell was gone. So I resumed meditation for a few more hours and finally fell asleep. On the last day, which is day 10, our noble silence was over at 10 a.m. If I forgot to mention, when you're here at the course, you're not allowed to speak to anyone. You're not allowed to make eye contact. You're not allowed to make any physical contact. No gesturing, no hello, no thank you, nothing. Which seemed a little excessive, but I get it. You really, really need to be hyper-focused and look within yourself. In the moment somebody gestures, your focus is broken. So at any rate, on the 10th day, noble silence was over, and the only place you were allowed to speak was at the residence. So everybody went back to the residence, and before they even took their shoes off, everybody's chirping and chattering, and my brain is just too much, too soon. I had to walk right out of there and go walk through the woods alone and slowly get back into it. I can't imagine what it would have been like having a noble silence to the point where you're dismissed and you go home. Like, that would have been a real shock to the system. So at any rate, after about 2 hours where I'd given the rest of the group ample time to get their chatter out of their system, I joined the group in the dining hall and began to talk. It was a sensation in itself. Not being able to talk for 9 days straight is definitely going to make an impact. And if, a traumatic moment that lasts 2 minutes can change your life, 10 days, meditating 10 hours a day, if not more, in total silence, can change your life. You should know that the results are based on your own efforts. It's no different than a gym. You can go to a gym and take it easy on yourself, or you can go and break yourself. So, word to the wise, if you're thinking about taking this course, take it very seriously, or you're just going to feel like you wasted your time. And if you want to know more about this course, I recommend you check out a documentary called Dhamma Brothers, available on YouTube. It's about these two guys that take the course into a prison and teach some of the inmates how they too can train themselves to have some self-control.